I'm 100% sure that you have either watched or heard of the anime A Silent Voice, but with the same confidence I can say you likely know almost nothing about its director. If that's the case, you missed a significant part of understanding anime because its director completely changed Kyoto Animation in 2011. This director introduced new techniques into animation and inspired the director of Frieren. All these beautiful words are addressed to one person, Naoko Yamada. This was intentional. Within snippets of her interviews and speeches lie the answer to why she creates the type of anime we'll be discussing today. I promise you an exciting journey that will intrigue those familiar with her work and open up a new perspective on anime for those who are not. There's a saying, "Tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are." This implies that a person's identity is shaped by those surrounding them. For creative people, there's an added factor called inspiration. This happens when you watch a movie, listen to music, or touch a tree, and it moves you so deeply that you feel the urge to share that feeling. Something similar happened to Naoko Yamada. Since childhood, she loved drawing people in various situations and characters from popular anime. But when she was about 10 years old, something happened. One night, unable to sleep, she decided to watch TV. On the channel she chose, foreign films were aired late at night. The movie she saw that night blew the mind of the young girl and inspired her creativity. The film was The Color of Pomegranates. Another major inspiration for the young Naoko Yamada was and still is Yasujiro Ozu. All of Ozu's films adhere to one theme, capturing the simplicity of everyday life. His movies show people living their ordinary lives and resolving domestic conflicts. No matter which of his films you pick, there's always one recurring room. Characters spend half an hour in that room, then go outside to live a little beyond the house, only to return later. Someone might die in that house, and everyone grieves, but they continue living there. Another significant aspect is sound. For much of the film, you might hear someone mopping floors or people working in an office. This approach to sound can express loneliness, the intimacy of a scene, or the quiet rhythm of life. But how can a person who creates anime not be inspired by anime? In one interview, Naoko Yamada was directly asked about this, and she mentioned Hayao Miyazaki's Kiki's Delivery Service. However, Miyazaki's style is often considered distinct from typical anime. It's something else. Still, I have several answers to this question. The first is rooted in her background. As I mentioned, she loved drawing anime characters as a child. But she also loved photography and filming the world around her. Drawing and cinema constantly clashed. Obviously, one side had to prevail, and this happened in middle school. At that time, Naoko Yamada joined a photography club and found many friends who were also interested in cinema. This solidified her desire to become a filmmaker. Until then, she had frequently practiced drawing, but here's where the earlier saying comes into play. Tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. Interestingly, when she entered university, she chose the Faculty of Fine Arts to study painting. It might have seemed more logical to pursue photography or cinematography. But after university, she still had the burning desire to work in filmmaking. Then the pivotal moment came when she saw an ad for Kyoto Animation. As an animator, she established a principle. All animation originates from someone's imagination, captured in a single frame. Therefore, instead of drawing inspiration from the echoes of others' fantasies reflected in art, it's better to turn to live performances, real life, or the people you meet. This is similar to what Hayao Miyazaki said, though his inspiration also included books, and he drew from animation in the 1950s and 1960s. Finally, we arrive at Naoko Yamada becoming an animator at the age of 20. Perhaps this doesn't sound particularly surprising in the context of anime, but how about this fact? Just 4 years after becoming an animator, the studio entrusted her with creating her own anime. If your eyes didn't just turn into spirals, you might need more context. Normally, the path for animator to anime director takes 10 to 15 years. This lengthy journey is needed to learn teamwork, develop animation skills, and earn the trust of the studio before being given the opportunity to direct individual episodes as a trial. After this long process, lasting 10 to 15 years, you might finally be entrusted with creating your own project. For context, Hayao Miyazaki became a director at 36, Makoto Shinkai at 39, and Satoshi Kon at 35. And I could go on, but I'll stop to emphasize that Naoko Yamada is considered the youngest of the successful directors. At the time of her debut, she was only 24 years old. Even more remarkable is that her debut work was the anime K-On! I'll start this story with a statement from Naoko Yamada in which she says there are two types of directors. Those who act as cameramen trying to bring their vision to the screen, and second, those who are actors living inside their characters. This distinction will serve as a key element in analyzing her directorial style and understanding which type she belongs to. In K-On!, the focus is on everyday moments and the leisurely pace of life. This is symbolized by a recurring element throughout the story. The turtle Ton-chan and the rabbit, a reference to the fable about the tortoise and the hare, suggesting we should take life at our own pace. This is reflected in the animation, where we see several minutes of Yui cleaning, studying, playing guitar, going back to studying, reading a book on concentration, and then playing guitar again. This sequence lasts about 4 minutes but fully conveys the anime's slice-of-life approach. During these mundane moments, the camera often adopts wide shots, capturing all the characters in full frame, much like Yasujiro Ozu's style. The camera is also positioned at waist level or lower to create a grounded effect. However, Naoko Yamada enhances this with her own dynamic angles or transitions between shots for comedic effect. For example, a character might start by looking directly at the camera, stating something. Then the camera pulls back to reveal another character reacting, shifting the focus to a third character. The camera then transitions to a wide shot positioned below the waistline. What stood out in 2009 as surprising for a TV anime was that K-On! Slightly broke the rules established by Osamu Tezuka, such as minimizing movement and focusing on the eyes. While anime films had already experimented with breaking this rule in the 1990s, TV animation remained conservative because it was cheaper to add less motion. But then, in came a 24-year-old Naoko Yamada, who told the studio director, "I want K-On! To have more realistic anatomy, so we can show more movement." Normally, any other director would have laughed, but Kyoto Animation's director took her seriously, provided funding, and Naoko Yamada went on to create. The focus on movement rather than just the eyes became a key to Naoko Yamada's success. Her characters might use words to convey general information, but their actions reveal their personalities and emotions. For example, when Yui walks to meet her friends, she first gets distracted and bumps into someone on a crosswalk. Then while crossing to the other side, she notices a dog and starts playing with it. This shows us that she struggles to focus on a single goal and constantly gets sidetracked, even when her friends are just 2 meters away observing her. But what truly sets Naoko Yamada apart was her unique storytelling tools. Legs. This was a second departure from establishing norms. While most anime directors emphasize expressing eyes, Naoko Yamada applied the same principle to legs. It turns out that legs are a more versatile tool than eyes for showing character development. For instance, in the first episode, Yui is late for school, runs down the stairs, and slips on a flat surface. She gets up and keeps running. In the final episode, Yui is again late for school, runs down the same stairs, and slips in the same spot. But this time she recovers mid-slip, steadies herself on her right leg, and keeps running. With this one motion, Naoko Yamada demonstrates character growth, while staying true to this unique detail. As for Tamako Market, I can't say much because Naoko Yamada didn't introduce many ideas here. Instead, she refined elements from K-On! While incorporating new inspirations. Here too, the focus is on everyday life, but with a more optimistic tone. While K-On! Had a grounded color palette, often leaning into melancholy, Tamako Market bursts with bright colors. However, whenever the heroine leaves her neighborhood, the colors become slightly muted. This is how Yamada demonstrates where the heroine feels more comfortable and what she sees as meaningful in life. Flat scenes are typically more comforting to us because they contain less information, making it easier for the brain to process. Such scenes also tend to feel calmer, even when dramatic events unfold. That's why in Tamako's shop we often encounter flat compositions. Alternatively, there's minimal depth behind the characters, but it is slightly blurred to separate it from the foreground. And of course, the legs. Let me highlight a scene that shows how legs can serve as a contrast to emotions. One character takes on the responsibility of choreographing a performance for their club. She struggles, begins to blame herself for taking on the task, and feels like she's let her friends down. Then philosophical musings from the shopkeeper give her a moment of hope, only for the shopkeeper to crush it. The character collapses emotionally. She crosses her legs and displays nervous rhythm through them. Later, she drinks tea, and from her legs, we understand the tea is hot. If Tamako's shop was about optimism and an ideal world free of problems, the film Tamako Love Story changes all the rules set by the series. The first thing that stands out is the color grading and visual effects. While the series was bright and leaned toward anime-like use of color, the feature film feels closer to cinema. Muted colors and contrasting lighting dominate now. The use of color and light adds additional depth. In the series, we saw subtle differences in tones between Tamako's neighborhood and the school. In the film, however, the color palette depends not on location, but on emotions. For example, on the river, the palette transitions gradually from blues to pinks, symbolizing a new beginning. Later, the protagonist runs through her favorite neighborhood, which blends into a chaotic swirl of colors, reflecting her scattered thoughts. Once this effect subsides, we notice how cold tones start creeping into her beloved neighborhood, while warm tones infiltrate unfamiliar streets and the school. Eventually, everything settles into a formula similar to the film's beginning, but with one key change. The sound also underwent a transformation, specifically the approach to sound design. The series, rooted in optimism, adhered to a major tone, while the film introduces minor notes reminiscent of Yasujiro Ozu. For example, when a character is left alone, everyday sounds consume the silence, reflecting the heroine's mixed emotions. Music penetrates her daily life to drown out intrusive thoughts, but those thoughts inevitably catch up. In moments of disconnect, the music abruptly stops. Yamada has often been questioned about the emphasis on legs in her earlier works, and perhaps that's why they're less prominent here, but carry a more personal touch. Since this is Tamako's love story, the focus revolves around her, and her legs convey various emotions and character traits. Some leg-centric scenes align with the narrative, but even then, the legs work in tandem with the story. Words provide context, but actions solidify it. Actions can convey more than words, and only actions can communicate thoughts if the other person is deaf. However, here's the twist. We don't always interpret actions the way the other person intends to convey them. Words suffer from this as well, often for similar reasons. The phrase, "a silent voice," is not just the title of an anime, but the ideal medium for Naoko Yamada to express everything she has refined in her past works. When actions, not words, become the primary mode of communication, Yamada is unmatched. Drawing inspiration from the color of pomegranates, ozu, music, and life itself, she created an anime that everyone has heard about. Yamada was handed a gem. A story about a boy who cannot look people in the eye and constantly stares at their legs. In the film, we often identify a character first by their legs before transitioning to their body and face. The only person he can look in the eye is the heroine, but he must communicate with her using gestures, which once again places Yamada in her element. Beyond gestures, sound vibrations play a role in their communication. For instance, when the boy grips a railing, the heroine senses the vibration. Or when she watches fireworks, she feels the vibrations through a cup in her hand, as if it allows her to hear them. The film is scattered with countless small details like these, which carry both directorial and narrative significance. There are two standout directorial choices. The first is when the heroine, upon meeting the boy for the first time, cannot decide what expression to greet him with and ends up running away. The second is the language of flowers. Yamada has mentioned that it's better not to analyze the meaning of flowers. Their shapes and colors will guide viewers to understand emotions. The framing of conversations is another deliberate decision. Have you noticed that when the main characters communicate, they are always shown separately? First, the boy speaks alone in the frame. Then the girl is shown alone, in a completely different shot and location. This choice by Yamada emphasizes that, though they are physically communicating, they do not yet understand each other internally. The breaking of the emotional barrier between the protagonists happens on the train when the heroine writes a message to the boy, revealing her soul for the first time. However, there remains another barrier to mutual understanding between them. This barrier is connected to their method of communication. Their interactions have always been distant and conditional, but now an action is needed to bring the two characters closer together. This action could involve something like hugging or holding hands. The latter is a more fitting choice. Throughout the story, the characters are constantly jumping or falling somewhere and attempting to grab each other in these moments. For example, the heroine jumps off a bridge and the hero tries to grab her hand, but fails. Or the hero stumbles on a ledge and the heroine tries to catch him but cannot. This barrier is broken only toward the end of the film, at which point the characters reach their maximum emotional closeness. The synchronization of their movements at the climax symbolizes the breaking of these barriers. It shows that they now understand each other and are alike in many ways. This essence seems to encapsulate the directorial style of Naoko Yamada. This analysis gives insight into the type of director Naoko Yamada is. Her approach highlights an emphasis on storytelling through actions rather than dialogue. After all, words can say anything, but actions convey genuine emotions and reveal a character's true nature. By the age of 35, Naoko Yamada had directed 4 anime films and 3 anime series. To me, that sounds quite impressive. 2 of these works became milestones in the anime industry: K-On!, whose success many studios have tried to replicate, and A Silent Voice, which demonstrates how action and cinematic techniques can be integrated into animation. With A Silent Voice, Naoko Yamada established her signature style not only in Japan, but also on the global stage. Another noteworthy achievement is that she wrote the lyrics for the main theme song of one of her works, and this wasn't her first experience with lyric writing. She also contributed lyrics for Tamako Market and plans to continue doing so in the future. I've dedicated so much time to discussing her direction while barely touching on the scripts. That's because Naoko Yamada doesn't write scripts. Unlike Hayao Miyazaki, who starts with an idea and storyboards the entire film, Yamada contributes to the storytelling in a different way. As a director, she has significantly enriched the world of animation. She demonstrated that serial anime can be of high quality. She showed how cinematic techniques can be adapted for anime films. However, when viewed as an author, some questions arise. This is because all of her projects have been scripted by the same writer who has both shaped and been shaped by Naoko Yamada, Reiko Yoshida. Reiko Yoshida began her career with Dragon Ball, but she later wrote scripts for anime adaptations like Boys Over Flowers and Digimon, before being invited to Studio Ghibli, where she wrote the script for The Cat Returns. This film likely boosted her reputation and opened many doors. Over her 30-year career, Yoshida has written 160 scripts, receiving awards for 4 of them as Best Screenwriter. That averages out to about 5 scripts per year, a number that you can decide for yourself if it's a lot or not. In 2005, she worked on that slice-of-life anime, Aria. By 2008, she finished the project but discovered her love for writing stories about imperfect people navigating challenging lives rather than stereotypical superheroes. This principle became her first connection with Naoko Yamada. The specifics of how Yoshida came to work on K-On! Are unclear, but when she submitted her script, Yamada immediately felt a sense of familiarity. After discussions and revisions, Yamada knew that Yoshida was the right choice. One reason for this is Yoshida's focus on telling stories about flawed individuals, but it's also about her writing style. In her scripts, dialogue may seem important, but the true meaning lies in the actions and environment. Typically, Yoshida was asked to rewrite her scripts for serial anime, as her approach was considered too costly. However, her style found a home in feature-length anime, which explains why so many of her successful projects are films. Meeting Naoko Yamada, who prioritizes action over words in conveying emotion, was the perfect chance. While K-On! Started as a cautious adaptation of a 4-panel manga, its second season brought deeper themes that became pivotal later. Directorial hints of an eventual conclusion are sprinkled throughout, as is the script's reference to the graduation in the first episode. However, these thoughts are pushed to the background until the second episode, when the characters realize their school festival performance was their last. The moral of the anime emerges. Everything comes to an end. Yet every end is followed by a new beginning. After the second season concluded, the K-On! Movie became the next chapter. After the immense success of the second season, the studio decided to make a film. Naoko Yamada proposed 2 ideas: another school story or sending the characters on an overseas journey. The latter was chosen. Yet one thing remained constant. Reiko Yoshida wrote the script. Given the idea, Yoshida translated it into a screenplay, and Yamada refined it further. There are moments in the script that I considered important. For example, she added a scene where the girls run to the rooftop and scream. Yoshida said that this better reflect the state the characters are in. It's as if they are about to confess, and of course, they are overwhelmed by anxiety and nervousness, so naturally they would want to look at the sky. A similar scene can be seen in the story of Tomoka's love. If K-On! Revolves entirely around music, then in Tomoka's little shop, it seems there's no room left for it. However, somewhere deep in the neighborhood, on the second floor, there's a hidden music shop called The Star and the Clown, where the shopkeeper often talks to teenagers about the meaning of life and plays a record with music fitting for a specific scene in the anime. Music also sneaks a bit into Tomoka's family. Her father wrote a song specifically for her mother to confess his feelings. This song is discovered by Tomoka in the series and is heard again in the film. The main essence of the film which Yamada aimed to convey is captured in this shot. Tomoka stands alone facing a vast starry sky. Yamada mentioned that she wanted to show Tomoka standing at the threshold of the universe, or in other words, stepping into adulthood. In this approach, the entire series works as a prelude where everything was fine. But 30 minutes into the movie comes the love confession, which triggers a full hour of adventures. This is reflected both in the directing and the script. However, we still need to understand why Yamada Naoko works exclusively with one screenwriter. How Yamada Naoko influenced Kyoto Animation, and how Kyoto Animation changed Yamada Naoko. Kyoto Animation was founded back in 1981 by a female artist, Yoko Hata, who previously worked at Mushi Production. Her husband, Hideaki Hata, joined her in management, taking on half of the operational responsibilities. Initially, the studio functioned more as an outsourcing team, handling episodes for large anime studios. Eventually, they assembled a team of staff, and Yoko Hata, together with her husband, decided to prove that they could create their own projects. This led to the creation of 2 OVAs, which made it clear that Kyoto Animation wasn't ready to produce its own works yet. Only after 10 years in 2002 did the studio try making several OVAs again, which finally led to their first full-fledged project. Around this time, the studio launched a recruitment campaign that caught the attention of Yamada Naoko, who joined as an animator. From 2005 to 2008, the studio released a streak of successful anime: Air, Canon, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, Full Metal Panic, Lucky Star, and Clannad. Yamada Naoko worked as an animator on all these projects, and on Clannad, she was given her first opportunity to direct several episodes. Yamada's unique style was first noticed by her mentor, Tatsuya Ishihara. At the time, he said this about her: "This girl is strange but talented." Upon hearing this recommendation, Hideaki Hata invited Yamada and asked if she wanted to become an anime director. After this conversation, work at the studio picked up momentum. Statements about focusing more on animation, followed by granting full creative freedom, led to Yamada Naoko producing the studio's most successful anime. The success of this anime was measured by the sheer volume of merchandise sold, and it sold more than all the studio's previous anime combined. However, Yamada Naoko didn't achieve this level of freedom overnight. Senior staff recognized her talent and decided to push her forward to the leadership. Moreover, Hideaki Hata, the studio director, aimed to make Kyoto Animation independent. For this, he needed a standout creator to help implement this vision. He decided to take a risk and bet on Yamada Naoko's success. As a result, he allocated funds for almost all her ideas. Do you know who Kyoto Animation depended on? Let me share a secret about why many studios are reluctant to create high-quality anime series and why Kyoto Animation was so eager for independence. In reality, most anime studios function as hired labor. Above them stands a production committee. This committee decides which manga to adapt, which studio to assign the adaptation to, and how much money to allocate for the project. For example, when a manga like Jujutsu Kaisen becomes popular, the committee decides to adapt it and looks for studios skilled in action anime. They find MAPPA and give them the contract. Then they set a deadline, 25 episodes in 1 year. This means the studio can only decide whether to sign the contract or not. Of course, if you don't like these terms, the committee will simply find another studio, leaving yours without a hit anime. But let's say you create this hit anime and everyone watches it, thinking your studio is raking in money. In reality, that's not the case. All intellectual property rights belong to the committee, meaning all profits go to them, and the studio receives only a small percentage. This is why many studios don't bother striving for quality. They either lack the resources or simply dislike the project, but have to do it to survive. Hideaki Hata wasn't satisfied with this system, and he sought a way to create leverage over the committee and make anime independently. The solution lay in intellectual property rights. The committee owns the rights to publish manga and earns money from sales. Therefore, the answer was to create their own manga publishing division with in-house authors. Since it's their publishing house, the money goes to them, not the committee. Plus, revenue from merchandise like plush toys, mugs, and t-shirts also goes to the studio rather than the committee. In 2011, thanks to the success of K-On!, Kyoto Animation managed to secure a portion of the merchandise profits. All this money was invested in two areas. First, they opened Kyoto Animation Esuma Bunko, their publishing division. Second, they expanded the studio. The main idea was to build all necessary departments within the studio and stop outsourcing to other studios. This environment is where Yamada Naoko thrived. She consistently worked with the same people, communicated easily with everyone, controlled the process, and felt comfortable surrounded by friends. This is why Yamada Naoko often collaborated with Reiko Yoshida. They weren't just two colleagues tied by contracts, but friends. And this is why Yamada Naoko could produce such high-quality work. If it had been any other studio, Yamada wouldn't have been able to showcase her love for cinematic directing so vividly. Other studios wouldn't have had as much money or opportunities for creative projects. Consequently, she inspired the entire studio with her approach, and thanks to her, cinematic direction with film-like visuals became a hallmark of Kyoto Animation style. The studio, due to significant financial resources, would have naturally gravitated towards quality, but Yamada pointed the way toward action-focused cinema. Thus, Yamada became the studio's lead director. Starting in 2011, she participated in almost every project, bringing a piece of her vision to each one. Now, Yamada has become someone who inspires even the veterans of the studio, and her style is a benchmark for young directors. One such director was Kichiro Saito. In 2022, he directed Lonely Rocker, showcasing a more contemporary story of girl musicians. You can also notice his emphasis on legs or how he works with cinematic framing. By 2018, Kyoto Animation had become the most popular and profitable studio. In 2019, an unknown man entered one of the studio's main buildings and set it on fire. Half of the studio's core staff perished. 36 people died, and another 34 were injured. The building was completely destroyed by the flames. Part of the blame was placed on the lack of a fire safety system in the studio, which contributed to the disaster. But regardless of who or what was at fault, time cannot be turned back, nor can the lives lost be recovered. Many of the surviving staff needed psychological support. Those who returned to work at the studio had to take a long time to recover and help each other cope with the trauma. Although Yamada was fortunate to be working in another building, the tragedy deeply affected her. Losing so many friends in an instant, leaving behind only memories, she has never been asked about this in any interview for obvious reasons, but the fact remains. That same year, Yamada Naoko left the studio. Following her departure, Reiko Ishido, composer Kenzo Kyusho, and several animators, artists, and designers also left. Around the same time, Masaki Iwaso announced he was stepping down as the director of Saint Saru. While the studio already had prepared authors and directors, it wouldn't hurt to have a new talent that many could look up to. Fortunately, Reiko Ishido, who had previously worked at Saint Saru, suggested Naoko Yamada to join the studio. What kind of chemistry would emerge? My first questions were, how has Naoko Yamada's directing style changed? And could I trace the influence of the 2019 tragedy in her work? I found answers to these questions in the very first minute of the anime. Slightly dirty feet walk past a barking dog and a concealed corpse. This is immediately followed by a scene where a woman is sent to execution. The heroine tries to intervene, but this ultimately leads to her father's death, a death that sets off the most unexpected scene in Yamada's work. This is the most brutal anime Naoko Yamada has ever created. A single depicted death surpasses all her previous work in this regard. And the deeper we dwell into the anime, the more deaths occur both within the house of Taira and among ordinary people. There's another pattern to these deaths. Temples are constantly being burned, after which characters fall into despair, succumb to illness and die. Personally, I interpret it as a sublimation of the 2019 tragedy. The symbolism of flowers also changes. Flowers appear and symbolize something, but more importantly, they are synonymous with the house of Taira. When someone is executed for the first time, we don't see a head being cut off, but a flower falling. When the eldest son of the family succumbs to an unknown illness, a flower falls. And at the very end of the anime, we see an entire garden of fallen flowers. However, while this story hints at tragedy and blood flows around innocent people, there is a hidden corner of peace. After her father's death, the heroine ends up in the house of Taira, where she has fun with children, plays melodies for the locals, finds a best friend, and witnesses the downfall of the great house. To me, this heroine resembles Naoko Yamada. She entered a house where she spent most of her life. Everyone around her grew up and changed, but she always remained a child, and she couldn't prevent the family's collapse. Her role is that of an observer. The anime is based on an ancient tale about the house of Taira. However, only the general elements remain. The story itself has completely changed its tone. In the ancient tale, the house of Taira was portrayed as villains punished by the gods for all their sins. Here we see something akin to Miyazaki's approach. There are no clear-cut villains. Yes, the house of Taira burned temples and killed people, but we are shown that this was either an accident or a necessity. I'm not justifying violence. Rather, I'm saying this is a story about the 12th century where violence was committed not only by the house of Taira. The imperial family and other houses also indulged in executions, temple burning, and city conquests. All of this is depicted in the anime. For me, this breaks the mold of what kind of director Naoko Yamada is. By showing all this, she doesn't reduce the story to unequivocal evil. We see that each side of the conflict has its own goals, and it so happened that the only method they knew to resolve issues was selfish war. When it ended, those who started it weren't shown as celebrating villains, but rather as people realizing the consequences of their actions. This isn't a coincidence. Here, Naoko Yamada conceived it, and Naoko Yamada decided it. Yes, she worked alongside Reiko Ishido, but from reading interviews, I gathered that this is Yamada's work through and through. She went against the type of directing she had adhered to before for the first time. She decided not just to observe the story, but to film it from the perspective of I. The anime tells us that any great cult or empire ends in collapse. Every life ends in death, and after many years this collapse will be forgotten. Within the historical context, it is necessary to accept that there are no good or evil sides. All these houses considered themselves righteous and believed they were doing a noble deed. But instead of creating villains and dividing people into us and them, it's better to internalize the words I mentioned earlier. In 2022, Naoko Yamada was invited to create an animated episode for the series Modern Love. It can be said that, in a way, Yamada became a director of live-action films, but only partially, as she still had to create an animated episode. The hook lies in the fact that this is John Carney's series, which Naoko Yamada admired. And now John Carney himself was impressed by her and invited her to collaborate. The key line of the episode sounds as though it came from both Naoko Yamada and John Carney. Music is like a treasure chest of your soul. One song can unleash a flood of memories. Narratively, this episode was once again filmed from the perspective of I, as it was with House of Taira. The protagonist here is an artist who loves cinema and music. In her school years, she didn't think much about the future and simply lived in the moment. As an adult, she couldn't find her path and worked as an office clerk. But then she suddenly heard a song from her teenage years. Memories came flooding in, followed by the resolve to take her first step in developing her talent. This led to a romantic reunion and liberation from the corporate environment. Now she designs album covers for an indie band. Indeed, when one door closes, another opens. The key is to take notice. Naoko Yamada succeeded, and in 2024, she released her feature-length animated film, Your Color, with Saint Saru Studio. When actions, rather than words, become the primary means of communication, there's no one who can compare to Naoko Yamada in this skill. Inspired by music, inspired by life, we stumbled upon an anime that few have heard of. This is truly a magnum opus from an artistic standpoint. The Garden of Memories is a completely original project by Naoko Yamada. Perhaps I'd now be launching into another tirade about what has changed in Naoko Yamada as a director, and why she suddenly became an author. However, thanks to her interview, I can delve a little into this matter of authorship. While working on the tale of the Taira house, Yamada for the first time decided to transition from an observer to a participant in the events. And the Garden of Memories is a more deliberate evolution of her style and her journey of self-discovery as an artist. Here's where the final hook comes in. Naoko Yamada writes lyrics for a song again, and this becomes the starting point for creating an original short film. And from the very beginning, it's clear that this is Naoko Yamada's screenplay. There are no words in it at all. The interaction between the characters is conveyed through action and music. The meaning of this short film is embedded in its title. The Garden of Memories is what remains of a person after they die. It holds emotions, memories, and images of their favorite flowers. Perhaps over the years, this garden will become overgrown and forgotten. And then someone will find it again. But that will be an entirely different story, where the one who created the garden will already be forgotten.
I want to touch people's hearts by showing the emotions between them. That is why the most important part of my work is portraying people's hearts. I have a single heart with which I want to touch the hearts of many people.
Naoko Yamada does not aim to push the viewer into an extreme emotional state. She is more about quiet emotions. Yamada struggles with conveying her ideas and thoughts to people, but somehow she manages to reveal her directorial style to others. Personally, I wouldn't want to idolize her. Through this essay, I wanted to highlight not only Naoko Yamada's strengths, but also her weaknesses. I wanted to talk not so much about the director as about the person, her world, and her creative journey. Whether I succeeded or not is for you to decide. What I wanted was for more people to know about her and perhaps to find a piece of themselves in her work. Especially in today's world, we need more stories that show that no matter what tragedy befalls your measured life, the most important thing is to keep doing what you love. So no matter how anxious or lonely it gets, keep living and pursuing your goals. No matter how hard it may be, I believe everyone can find the best home for their wandering heart.